They said humans were weak. They said our ships were primitive. They said our weapons were toys compared to their plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 17 star systems without losing a single vessel. Their fleet of 300 warships had never met defeat. But they had never met Commander Sarachun. What happened in the Kepler 442 system that day would be remembered across the galaxy for millennia. One human fighter pilot, 300 alien warships, a battle that defied every law of physics, every rule of warfare, and every assumption about what it means to be human. This is the story of how one person's refusal to surrender changed the course of galactic history forever. The emergency klaxon screamed through the corridors of Kepler Station as Commander Sarachun sprinted toward the fighter bay. Her boots echoed against the metal flooring, each step matching the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat. Around her, personnel rushed in all directions, their faces painted with the pale glow of emergency lighting and raw terror. All civilian vessels, evacuate immediately. The station commander's voice crackled through the intercom system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Unknown hostile fleet approaching our position. Sarah burst through the doors of the fighter bay and stopped dead in her tracks. The massive space was nearly empty. Where dozens of Earth Defense Force fighters should have been lined up in perfect formation, only 3 remained. Her modified F-99 Valkyrie sat alone in the center, its sleek black hull gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. Chief Mechanic Rodriguez appeared at her side, his weathered face grim. "Commander, we got most of the squadron out 30 minutes ago. Sent them to escort the civilian transports to the jump point. But something's wrong with the long-range sensors. We didn't see this fleet until they were practically on top of us." Sarah climbed into her flight suit with practiced efficiency, her hands moving automatically through the pre-flight routine she had performed thousands of times. "How many ships are we talking about, Chief?" Rodriguez consulted his data pad, his expression growing darker. "Initial scans show, Christ, Commander, 300 vessels, maybe more. The computer is having trouble getting an exact count because they're using some kind of stealth technology we haven't seen before." 300. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The entire Terran Defense fleet barely had half that number spread across 12 systems. And most of those were older ships built before humanity had encountered any hostile alien species, before they learned that the galaxy was not the peaceful place they had hoped. "What about reinforcements?" she asked, sealing her helmet and running through the Valkyrie system checks. All green lights. At least her ship was ready, even if nothing else was. Admiral Morrison is mobilizing the Third Fleet, but they're 6 hours away at best. The evacuation transports need at least 2 hours to reach the jump point. Rodriguez paused, then looked directly at her. "Commander, you need to go with them. Your fighter is fast enough to catch up, and the civilians are going to need escort protection on the other side." Sarah's hands stilled on the control panel. Through the bay's observation window, she could see the first dots of light appearing in the darkness of space. The enemy fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel with the coordinated precision that spoke of military discipline and overwhelming confidence. She had trained her entire adult life for this moment. Not this exact scenario, because no war college in human space taught courses on single-fighter suicide missions. But for the moment when duty demanded everything, when the choice came down to running or standing and fighting against impossible odds. Her younger brother's face flashed in her mind. Danny was 17, still in school on Earth, still believing that the galaxy was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Her parents, retired now, but still proud of their daughter who had chosen to serve. Her squadron mates who had followed her through the Hell Week training on Titan, who trusted her judgment in every battle simulation and real combat engagement they had ever flown together. All of them were counting on the people in those evacuation transports making it to safety. The transports carried the families of Kepler Station personnel, the researchers who had made breakthrough discoveries about faster-than-light communication, The children whose only crime was being born on the wrong side of an alien empire's expansion plans. "Chief," she said quietly, her decision crystallizing with absolute certainty. "I need you to get to the evacuation ships. Make sure they know to burn hard for the jump point and not look back." Rodriguez's eyes widened. "Commander, you can't be serious. One fighter against a fleet? It's suicide." Sarah powered up the Valkyrie's fusion engines, feeling the familiar vibration as the ship came fully online. The heads-up display flickered to life, showing her weapon systems, defensive countermeasures, and the tactical situation that made her stomach clench. Hundreds of red dots were spreading across the scanner, each one representing an enemy warship that outmassed her fighter by several thousand tons. "Maybe," she replied, opening the launch tube sequence. "But those transports need time, and I'm the only one here who can buy it for them. Besides, the Zephyrians have never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner." The chief mechanic looked like he wanted to argue, but the years of military discipline overruled his personal feelings. He saluted sharply. "Give them hell, Commander, and may God watch over you." Sarah returned the salute, then sealed her canopy. The fighter bay's atmospheric containment fields shimmered as the massive doors began to open, revealing the star field beyond. And scattered across that field like deadly jewels, the Zephyrian fleet. She had studied their ships in the intelligence briefings, but seeing them in person was different. Each vessel was a work of art, their hulls curved and organic-looking, as if they had been grown rather than built. They moved through space with an elegant grace that human ships could never match, their formations precise and beautiful, and utterly lethal. The largest ships, the dreadnoughts, were nearly 2 kilometers long. Their hulls bristled with weapon ports, shield generators, and sensor arrays. Behind them came the cruisers and destroyers, smaller but no less dangerous. And surrounding the entire fleet were clouds of fighter craft, their numbers so vast that they looked like swarms of insects around a hive. Sarah's tactical computer chimed softly, presenting her with firing solutions and threat assessments that painted a picture of certain death. Her Valkyrie carried 8 plasma torpedoes for pulse lasers and a single antimatter missile that was meant to be used only against capital ships. Against 300 enemy vessels, it might as well have been a rock and a slingshot. But Commander Sarah Chun had not earned a reputation by backing down from impossible odds. During the Proxima incident, she had held off a pirate fleet with a damaged fighter and a half-empty fuel tank. In the asteroid mining wars, she had single-handedly destroyed a rebel stronghold that intelligence said was impregnable. Every simulation, every training exercise, every real combat mission had been preparing her for this moment. She opened a communication channel to Kepler Station. "Control, this is Valkyrie 1. I am engaging the enemy fleet. Advise all civilian vessels to proceed immediately to the jump point. Do not wait for me." Valkyrie 1, negative. "Return to base immediately." That's a direct order from Admiral Morrison. Sarah smiled grimly. Morrison was a good admiral, but he was 6 hours away and had never met a Zephyrian battle group in person. "Control, Admiral Morrison can court-martial me when he gets here. Valkyrie 1 is going hunting." She cut the communication channel and pushed her engines to full power. The Valkyrie leaped forward like a predator pouncing on prey, accelerating at rates that would have liquefied an unprotected human body. But Sarah was far from unprotected. Her flight suit was a miracle of human engineering, equipped with inertial dampeners, life support systems, and combat stimulants that would keep her conscious and fighting even under impossible conditions. The first enemy ships to detect her approach were a squadron of Zephyrian interceptors, sleek vessels about twice the size of her Valkyrie, but built for speed and maneuverability. They moved to intercept her in a perfect diamond formation, their plasma cannons charging with an ominous blue glow. Sarah armed her first torpedo and designated the lead interceptor as her target. The enemy pilot was good. She could tell immediately. He jinked and weaved through space with a fluid grace that marked an experienced fighter pilot. But he had never faced human reflexes before. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the smartest, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. But evolution had given them something unique: the ability to function under extreme stress, to make split-second decisions when death was imminent, to push their bodies and minds beyond theoretical limits when survival was at stake. The torpedo streak across the void, its guidance system locked onto the interceptor's engine signature. The alien pilot tried to evade, throwing his ship into a spiraling dive that would have impressed any flight instructor. But the torpedo adjusted its course with mechanical precision, and when it struck, the interceptor disappeared in a brilliant flash of nuclear fire. The remaining 3 interceptors opened fire immediately, their plasma bolts painting brilliant streaks across the darkness. Sarah rolled her fighter into a corkscrew pattern, the deadly energy beams passing close enough to overload her proximity sensors. She could feel the heat through her ship's hull, smell the ozone created by near misses that ionized the trace atmosphere around her fighter. Her return fire was precise and devastating. 2 pulse laser beams caught the second interceptor as it tried to flank her position, punching through its shields and hull plating like paper. The ship's reactor went critical, adding another brief star to the constellation of battle. The 3rd and 4th interceptors separated, trying to catch her in a crossfire. It was a textbook maneuver, and against most opponents, it would have been effective. But Sarah had spent years training in Earth's asteroid fields, learning to navigate 3-dimensional battlefields where death could come from any direction. She pulled her fighter into a climb that defied physics, using a gravity well from a nearby moon to slingshot herself above the enemy formation. From there, she had a clear shot at both remaining ships. Her 3rd torpedo took the port interceptor, while concentrated laser fire disabled the starboard vessel's engines. 4 enemy fighters destroyed in less than 3 minutes. It should have been impossible, but across the enemy fleet, alarms were beginning to sound. The Zephyrians had expected this to be a simple conquest, another primitive species to be crushed beneath the might of their empire. They had not expected resistance, and they certainly had not expected a single enemy fighter to tear through their advanced scouts like tissue paper. Sarah checked her fuel levels and weapon status. 7 torpedoes remaining, full laser batteries, and the antimatter missile still in reserve. Not much against 300 ships, but she had already proven that human determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Behind her, she could see the lights of the evacuation transports, tiny points of hope fleeing toward the safety of the jump point. They needed more time. She would buy it for them, no matter the cost. The main fleet was beginning to move now, their beautiful formations shifting as they prepared to engage this unexpected threat. Sarah could see weapon ports opening along the hulls of the massive dreadnoughts, defensive screens being raised around the smaller vessels. They thought they were ready for her. They were wrong. The Zephyrian fleet command ship Eternal Dominion was a monument to alien engineering and imperial arrogance. Its bridge stretched across 3 levels, with holographic displays showing the tactical situation from every possible angle. Fleet Admiral Kethvar stood at the center of it all, his forearms folded behind his back as he studied the readings that made no sense. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered worlds. Commander Zexhai, his tactical officer, manipulated the holographic display with nervous precision. "Admiral, we have lost 4 interceptors to a single enemy fighter. The pilot appears to be using unconventional tactics that our tactical computers cannot predict." Admiral Kethvar's primary eyes narrowed, while his secondary eyes continued to monitor the fleet displays. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered a species that could challenge Zephyrian tactical superiority. Their computer systems could calculate millions of combat scenarios per second, Their weapons could target enemies across entire star systems, and their shields could withstand the firepower of multiple battleships. Yet a single primitive fighter had just eliminated 4 of his best pilots. "Show me the engagement recordings," he ordered. The bridge's main display activated, showing the battle from multiple camera angles. Admiral Kethvar watched in growing disbelief as the human fighter moved through space with impossible agility, its pilot anticipating Zephyrian tactics as if reading their minds. Computer analysis indicates the enemy pilot's reaction time is approximately 40% faster than our best interceptor pilots, reported the tactical officer. Furthermore, the human appears to be using their ship's momentum and local gravitational fields to achieve acceleration rates that should be impossible for a fighter of that mass. Admiral Kethvar had studied human technology in the intelligence briefings. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive, their tactics straightforward. Nothing he had seen suggested they possessed the capability to challenge even a single Zephyrian cruiser, much less an entire fleet. But the evidence was undeniable. On his screens, the human fighter was already engaging his second wave of interceptors, and the results were even more disturbing than the first encounter. 12 interceptors had moved to surround the enemy fighter in a spherical formation, cutting off all possible escape routes. It was a maneuver that had never failed against any opponent the Zephyrians had ever faced. But the human pilot did something that defied all tactical logic. Instead of trying to escape the trap, she flew directly into the center of it. What followed was 3 minutes of the most spectacular combat Flying Admiral Kethvar had ever witnessed. The human fighter moved like a living thing, twisting and rolling through space while firing with mechanical precision. She used the Zephyrian ships themselves as cover, forcing the interceptors to hold their fire or risk hitting their own allies. When they tried to adjust their formation to compensate, she was already gone, appearing behind them to deliver killing shots before vanishing again into the chaos of battle. In those 3 minutes, 8 more interceptors died. No pilot can fly like that. The gravitational forces alone should have rendered the human unconscious. But Admiral Kethvar was beginning to understand. The intelligence reports had been wrong about human limitations. They had assumed that because human technology was primitive, human capabilities must be primitive as well. They had failed to account for the one factor that no computer analysis could quantify: the human spirit under extreme duress. All interceptor squadrons withdraw to defensive positions around the capital ships, he ordered. Launch the destroyer screen. If this human wants to fight, we will give them a proper battle. 20 Zephyrian destroyers moved forward in perfect formation, each ship armed with enough firepower to level city. Their plasma cannons charged with deadly energy, their missile tubes loaded with quantum warheads, their shields calibrated to withstand anything the primitive human technology could produce. They had not accounted for Commander Sarah Chen's growing fury. Sarah had watched the evacuation transports through her rear cameras as she engaged the second wave of interceptors. The civilian ships were moving as fast as their overloaded engines could manage, but they were still 45 minutes from a jump point. She needed to buy them more time, which meant she had to make the Zephyrian fleet commit more resources to stopping her. The destroyers were perfect for that purpose. Each enemy ship was nearly 300 meters long, bristling with weapons and protected by energy shields that could deflect most conventional attacks. Against any normal opponent, a single destroyer could dominate an entire battlefield. But Sarah had stopped thinking like a normal opponent the moment she saw the size of the enemy fleet. She armed her 4th torpedo and selected the lead destroyer as her target. But instead of firing immediately, she waited. The enemy ships were spreading into an engagement formation, trying to create overlapping fields of fire that would make it impossible for her to maneuver freely. Standard tactics would call for her to stay at maximum range and try to pick off individual ships with torpedo attacks. But standard tactics were designed for battles between evenly matched opponents. This was something else entirely. Sarah kicked her engines to maximum overload, pushing the Valkyrie far beyond its safe operational limits. The fusion reactor temperature spiked into the red zone. The inertial dampeners screamed warnings about structural stress, and her flight suit's medical systems began injecting combat stimulants directly into her bloodstream. She flew straight at the enemy formation. The destroyers opened fire when she was still 50 kilometers away, filling space with plasma bolts and missile trails. Any sane pilot would have turned away, sought cover, tried to survive the incoming barrage. But Sarah flew through it all, rolling and diving between the deadly energy beams with reflexes that seemed superhuman. Her torpedo struck the lead destroyer's forward shields at the same instant. She fired both pulse lasers at the ship's weapon ports. The combined impact overloaded the enemy's defensive systems, creating a cascade failure that left the massive warship defenseless for exactly 2.3 seconds. Sarah's fifth torpedo hit the destroyer's reactor core during that brief window. The explosion lit up half the star system. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the destroyer except expanding clouds of superheated gas and debris. But Sarah was already moving, using the explosion's shockwave to accelerate toward her next target. The second destroyer tried to track her with its main guns, but she was flying too fast and too erratically for their targeting systems to lock on. She came at the ship from below, where most of its weapons couldn't depress far enough to hit her. Her sixth torpedo struck the destroyer's engine section while her lasers carved through the vessel's hull plating like surgical instruments. The ship lost power and began to drift, its crew fighting to restore basic systems. The remaining 18 destroyers had finally managed to surround her, their combined firepower creating a web of destruction that should have been impossible to survive. But Sarah had learned something during her years of combat training that no Zephyrian military academy taught. Sometimes the best defense is to attack so aggressively that your enemies can't coordinate their response. She picked the destroyer directly above her and fired her seventh torpedo while simultaneously diving toward the ship below her. Both enemy vessels opened fire at the same instant, their plasma bolts crossing in the space where a fighter had been a fraction of a second earlier. The torpedo struck the upper destroyer's command section, while Sarah's fighter screamed past the lower ship's hull close enough for her to see individual alien crew members through the viewports. Her laser fire stitched a line of destruction along the vessel's length, targeting critical systems with surgical precision. 2 more destroyers disabled in the space of 30 seconds. Across the Zephyrian fleet, communication channels buzzed with disbelief and growing alarm. Battle group commanders who had never experienced defeat found themselves unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The human pilot was fighting like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, taking risks that no rational being would ever consider. Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical display with grudging admiration and growing concern. The human was down to her last torpedo, and her fighter's power readings indicated severe system strain from the overload conditions. But she had already inflicted more damage on his fleet than some entire enemy armadas had managed. "Sir," reported Commander Zex-High, "the human fighter is heading directly for Battle Group 7. If she continues her current course, she will reach the heavy cruisers within 10 minutes. The heavy cruisers were the backbone of Zephyrian fleet doctrine, massive ships with enough firepower to crack planets and enough armor to survive direct hits from antimatter weapons. They were positioned in the fleet's center, surrounded by layers of screening vessels and defensive platforms. No enemy had ever penetrated that far into a Zephyrian battle formation. "All units converge on the human fighter," Admiral Kethvar commanded. "I want every ship in this fleet participating in her destruction. It is time to show this primitive species the true power of the Zephyrian Empire." Sarah saw the enemy fleet's movement on her tactical display and smiled grimly. Perfect. By ordering every ship to focus on her, the Admiral had just made the biggest tactical mistake of his career. The tighter the enemy formation became, the more damage she could inflict with her remaining weapons. And she still had the antimatter missile, Her fighter screamed through space toward the enemy's heavy cruisers, dodging incoming fire from dozens of ships while her onboard computer calculated firing solutions for a final torpedo. Behind her, nearly 300 alien warships gave chase, their combined firepower enough to sterilize entire worlds. Ahead of her lay the heart of the enemy fleet, where the largest and most dangerous ships waited with weapons charged and shields raised. Sarah Chun had never felt more alive. The heavy cruiser Voidrender had served as the flagship of Battle Group 7 for over 2 centuries. Its armored hull bore the scars of a dozen major campaigns, and its weapon arrays had reduced entire rebel fleets to cosmic dust. Captain Morthak stood on its bridge, watching the approaching human fighter with a mixture of professional interest and absolute confidence. "Range to target?" he inquired, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting across the fleet communications channels. 60,000 kilometers and closing rapidly, reported his weapons officer. "The human appears to be on a direct collision course with our formation." Captain Morthak examined the tactical data flowing across his command displays. The primitive fighter was badly damaged now, its power output fluctuating as overloaded systems struggled to maintain basic functions. Its pilot had performed admirably against the screening vessels, but a single fighter attacking heavy cruisers was simply suicide. "Charge all main batteries," he ordered. "Target the human fighter and prepare to fire on my command. This ends now." But Commander Sarah Chun had not survived this long by making predictable choices. As she approached the enemy heavy cruisers, she made a calculation that would have seemed insane to any military strategist in the galaxy. Instead of attempting to penetrate the cruiser formation, she used it as a weapon against itself. Her 8th and final torpedo was not aimed at any of the heavy cruisers. Instead, she targeted the ammunition depot of a supply ship positioned between 2 of the massive warships. The torpedo struck with surgical precision, igniting a chain reaction that turned the supply vessel into an improvised nuclear weapon. The explosion caught both heavy cruisers completely off guard. Their shields, calibrated to deflect incoming fire from enemy ships, were not designed to handle the massive energy release of their own exploding ammunition. The blast wave tore through their defensive screens and hammered their hulls with debris traveling at relativistic speeds. One cruiser lost primary power and began to list heavily to starboard, its weapon systems offline, and its crew struggling to contain multiple hull breaches. The second ship survived the blast, but found its main gun turrets jammed with wreckage, reducing its firepower by 60%. Sarah flew through the heart of the explosion, her fighter's hull glowing cherry red from the intense heat. Radiation alarms screamed in her cockpit, and her life support systems worked frantically to filter the deadly particles streaming through the compromised canopy seals. But she was still alive, still flying, and still carrying the weapon that would make her final stand legendary. The antimatter missile, originally designed to destroy space stations and heavily fortified installations, the weapon contained enough destructive power to level a small city. No fighter in human space had ever carried such a device into combat, because the risk of accidental detonation was simply too great. But Sarah's Valkyrie had been modified extensively during its service life, fitted with experimental systems and prototype weapons that pushed the boundaries of human technology. She armed the missile as her fighter emerged from the explosion's aftermath, its guidance system locking onto the largest target in the enemy formation, Admiral Kethvar's command ship, the Eternal Dominion. The dreadnought was a masterpiece of Zephyrian engineering, over 2 kilometers of armored hull bristling with enough weapons to fight an entire fleet single-handed. Its shields could withstand direct hits from antimatter bombs. Its armor plating was stronger than most planetary crusts, and its crew of 10,000 included some of the finest military minds in the Empire. None of that would save it from what was coming. Sarah's tactical computer provided her with a firing solution, but she ignored it. Computer calculations were based on normal combat parameters and Nothing about this battle had been normal. Instead, she relied on instinct honed through years of combat flying, reading the flow of the battle like a language only she could understand. The Eternal Dominion was moving to bring its main batteries to bear on her position, its massive bulk turning with surprising grace for something so large. Other ships in the formation were adjusting their positions to provide supporting fire, creating small gaps in their defensive coverage as they maneuvered. Sarah dove toward the largest of those gaps, her fighter screaming through space at velocities that pushed her inertial dampeners to their absolute limits. Behind her, the entire Zephyrian fleet opened fire simultaneously, filling the void with enough destructive energy to crack moons. The light show was spectacular. Plasma bolts streaked past her fighter in brilliant colors. Quantum torpedoes detonated close enough to rattle her hull plating, and particle beams carved glowing trails through the darkness. Any one of those weapons could have vaporized her fighter instantly, but Sarah flew through the storm of fire as if she could see the future. She rolled left as a massive plasma bolt seared past her starboard wing. She pulled into a climb that put her above a spread of quantum torpedoes that would have reduced her to subatomic particles. She jinked right as 3 particle beams converged on her previous position, the deadly energy weapons missing her by mere meters. Admiral Kethvar watched from his command bridge in growing amazement. His fleet was expending enough ammunition to supply a major campaign, and somehow the human fighter continued to survive. More than survive, she was still closing on his flagship with unwavering determination. All defensive systems, concentrate fire on the approaching fighter, he commanded. Use everything we have. The Eternal Dominion's point defense networks came online, filling space around the massive ship with a web of destructive energy. Automated weapon systems tracked the incoming fighter with mechanical precision, calculating intercept vectors and firing solutions with processing power that dwarfed entire human computer networks. But Sarah had one advantage that no Zephyrian system could account for. She had already accepted her own death. The realization had come to her sometime during the battle with the destroyers, a moment of crystal clarity that burned away fear and left only purpose. She was going to die today. The mathematics of the situation made that inevitable. But her death would buy time for the evacuation transports, and it would send a message to the Zephyrian Empire that humanity would never surrender. That acceptance freed her from the survival instincts that limited other pilots. She could take risks that no rational person would consider because the outcome was already decided. All that mattered now was how much damage she could inflict before the universe collected its debt. The point defense fire was too intense to dodge completely. Energy beams scored hits on her fighter's hull, burning through armor plating and damaging critical systems. Her starboard laser array went offline, sparks flew from damaged control panels, and her life support system began cycling emergency atmosphere into the cockpit. But her missile guidance system was still functional. The antimatter warhead was still armed, and the range to target was down to 5,000 kilometers. Sarah lined up her final attack run, pointing her crippled fighter directly at the Eternal Dominion's command section. Around her, the bridge displays flickered and died as damage systems failed one by one. The smell of burning electronics filled the cockpit, and she could taste blood where flying debris had cut her lip. "Control, this is Valkyrie 1. She transmitted on the emergency frequency, knowing that the words would be recorded for history. Tell my family that I love them. Tell Admiral Morrison that the evacuation transports should have reached the jump point by now. And tell the Zephyrian Empire that this is what happens when you threaten humanity." She fired the antimatter missile. The weapon streaked across the remaining distance in seconds, its exotic matter warhead primed to release energies normally found only in the cores of stars. The Eternal Dominion's defensive systems tried desperately to intercept it, but the missile's guidance system had been designed by human engineers who understood that sometimes precision mattered more than raw power. Admiral Kethvar had exactly 1.7 seconds to comprehend what was about to happen to his flagship. In that brief moment, he finally understood why his intelligence analysts had been wrong about human capabilities. They had measured human technology, human weapons, human ships. They had never tried to measure the human soul. The antimatter missile struck the dreadnought's forward hull and detonated. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded and the debris stopped expanding, the mighty Eternal Dominion was gone. In its place was a rapidly cooling cloud of plasma and shattered metal, a monument to the price of underestimating human determination. But Sarah's fighter had been caught in the blast wave, its hull breached by the same forces that had destroyed the enemy flagship. Emergency systems screamed warnings about catastrophic damage, radiation exposure, and imminent reactor containment failure. She was dying, but she was not dead yet. Around her, the Zephyrian fleet was in chaos. The loss of their flagship and Supreme Commander had shattered their tactical coordination, leaving individual ship captains to make decisions without central guidance. Some vessels were pulling back to regroup, others were continuing the attack, and a few were simply holding position while their crews tried to understand what had just happened. Sarah looked at her weapon status display one final time. No torpedoes, no missiles. Her starboard laser array was destroyed, but her port array was still functional. Her reactor was approaching critical overload, which gave her perhaps 5 minutes before the containment field collapsed. 5 minutes to make those 5 minutes count. The nearest enemy ship was a cruiser about 2 kilometers away, its captain apparently paralyzed by the destruction of the flagship. Sarah pointed her dying fighter at the alien vessel and pushed her failing engines to maximum power one last time. She had come too far to stop now. The cruiser Starfall had participated in the conquest of 7-star systems during its 40-year service life. Its captain, Vextal, was a decorated veteran who had earned her rank through brilliant tactical decisions and unwavering loyalty to the Empire. But as she watched the human fighter approach her ship, she found herself facing a situation that no amount of experience had prepared her for. Her flagship was gone. Her supreme commander was dead. Her fleet was scattered across half a star system, with individual ships operating on their own initiative while junior officers tried to fill the leadership vacuum. And somehow, impossibly, the primitive human fighter was still coming. "Status report," she demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her command. "Multiple hull breaches detected on the approaching fighter," reported her sensor officer. "Power output is fluctuating wildly, and we're reading massive radiation levels from what appears to be an imminent reactor failure. The human pilot should be dead already from the radiation exposure alone." Captain Vextal studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human fighter was clearly dying, its systems failing one by one as battle damage accumulated beyond any possibility of repair. But it was still flying, still maneuvering, still heading directly for her ship with single-minded determination. "Weapons status?" she inquired. "All main batteries charged and ready, Captain. Point defense networks are online and tracking the target. We have clear firing solutions." "Then why haven't we destroyed it yet?" Her weapons officer hesitated before responding. "Captain, the human's flight pattern is unprecedented. Our targeting computers cannot predict her movements with sufficient accuracy to guarantee a hit. She appears to be using random evasion sequences that have no basis in known tactical doctrine." But Sarah wasn't using random evasion sequences. She was flying on pure instinct now, her conscious mind overwhelmed by radiation poisoning and system failures while some deeper part of her brain continued to function. Years of combat training had created neural pathways that operated below the level of conscious thought, reflexes that could respond to threats faster than the speed of rational analysis. Her fighter rolled left around a plasma bolt that would have vaporized her cockpit. She pulled into a climb that carried her above a spread of missiles, then dove toward the cruiser's hull at an angle that put her below the depression limits of its main guns. Her remaining laser array fired continuously, its coherent light beams carving through armor plating and critical systems with mechanical precision. The starfall shuddered under the assault, minor explosions blooming along its hull as the humans' weapons found vulnerable points in its structure. Captain Vextal felt her ship losing attitude control as the laser fire damaged thruster assemblies and guidance systems. "Return fire," she commanded. "All weapons, engage the target." But Sarah's fighter was already gone, having used the cruiser's own bulk to shield her from the incoming fire. She appeared on the ship's opposite side, her weapons still firing, still inflicting damage that accumulated with each passing second. Captain Vextal had fought rebel fleets, pirate armadas, and the military forces of a dozen different species. She had never encountered an opponent who fought like this, with absolute disregard for personal survival and complete focus on inflicting maximum damage. It was a style of warfare that violated every principle of rational military doctrine, and it was terrifyingly effective. The Starfall's reactor began showing signs of instability as Sarah's laser fire penetrated deeper into the ship's structure. Emergency containment procedures activated automatically, but the damage was spreading faster than the repair systems could compensate. "Captain," reported her engineering officer, "we're losing main power. If the human continues her attack pattern, we'll have reactor containment failure within 3 minutes." 3 minutes. Captain Vextal made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "All hands, abandon ship. Emergency evacuation protocols are now in effect." Across her bridge, the crew stared at her in shock. Zephyrian military tradition held that ships' captains died with their vessels rather than surrender to inferior species. But Captain Vextal had seen enough of human capabilities to know that traditional thinking had no place in this battle. "You heard me," she said firmly. "Evacuate the ship. That's a direct order." The Starfall's escape pods began launching even as Sarah continued her attack, the small craft scattering in all directions as they sought safety from the dying cruiser. She could have targeted them, could have added to the casualty count that was already beyond anything in recorded Zephyrian military history. Instead, she focused her fire on the ship's reactor core. The explosion added another brief star to the battlefield, but this time Sarah was ready for it. She used the blast wave to accelerate toward her next target, a destroyer whose captain was too paralyzed by shock to offer effective resistance. Her fighter was held together now by little more than emergency power and human willpower, but she managed to disable the destroyer's weapons before her laser array finally overloaded and went offline. No weapons, no missiles, no defensive systems. Her fighter's hull was breached in dozens of places. Her reactor was approaching critical overload, and the radiation levels in her cockpit were fatal to any known form of life. But Commander Sarachon was still flying. Around her, the Zephyrian fleet was beginning to withdraw. Ship after ship broke formation and fled toward the edge of the star system, their crews unwilling to continue a battle that had already cost them their flagship and supreme commander. The few vessels that remained seemed paralyzed by indecision, their captains unsure whether to continue fighting or join the general retreat. Sarah's tactical computer, one of the few systems still functioning, showed her the overall battle situation. The evacuation transports had reached the jump point 23 minutes ago and were now safely in hyperspace, carrying their precious cargo of human lives to safety. The Terran Defense Fleet's reinforcements were still 4 hours away, but they would arrive to find an empty battlefield. She had done it. Impossible odds, certain death, 300 enemy ships, and she had actually done it. The mission was complete, the civilians were safe, and the Zephyrian Empire had learned that humanity would never be an easy conquest. But her war was not over yet. Her fighter's reactor reached critical overload, and Sarah made her final decision. She pointed the dying Valkyrie toward the center of the remaining enemy formation and locked her controls in place. The reactor containment field collapsed 3 seconds later, turning her fighter into a miniature star that briefly outshone the local sun. The explosion caught 5 enemy ships in its destructive embrace, adding their hulks to the expanding debris field that marked the location of the most one-sided battle in galactic history. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the Valkyrie or its pilot except superheated plasma and the memory of courage that transcended rational thought. Admiral Morrison arrived 4 hours later with the Third Fleet, expecting to find the Kepler system overrun by enemy forces and the civilian population enslaved or dead. Instead, he found empty space, scattered wreckage, and sensor readings that told a story no military academy would believe. Commander Sarah Chun had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through pure determination and skill that bordered on supernatural. A single human fighter against 300 alien warships, and somehow the human had won. But the victory had come at a price that measured more than individual loss. The news of the Battle of Kepler 442 spread through human space faster than light itself. Every colony, every space station, every ship in the fleet heard the story of one pilot's last stand against an entire alien armada. The tale grew with each telling, but the basic facts remained unchanged. When faced with overwhelming odds, humanity's response was not surrender, but defiance that burned brighter than stars. The Zephyrian Empire's response was swift and predictable. Their invasion fleets withdrew to defensive positions while military analysts tried to understand how a primitive species could inflict such devastating losses on their forces. Intelligence reports were revised, invasion plans were postponed, and for the first time in their history, the Zephyrians began to question whether their conquest of human space was truly inevitable. Other alien species noticed the change immediately. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, terror of a dozen star systems, had been bloodied by a single human pilot flying an obsolete fighter. If humanity could accomplish that, what might they do when fully prepared for war? Trade agreements that had been weighted heavily in alien favor were suddenly renegotiated on more equitable terms. Border disputes that had been resolved through intimidation were reopened for diplomatic discussion. Species that had never considered humans worthy of serious attention began sending ambassadors to Earth, seeking to establish relationships with this unexpectedly dangerous new player in galactic politics. The memorial service for Commander Sarah Chun was held on Earth, broadcast throughout human space, and attended by representatives from 100 worlds. Admiral Morrison delivered the primary eulogy, his words measured and precise despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Sarah Chun understood something that our enemies failed to grasp, he said to the assembled mourners and the billions watching through electronic feeds. She understood that the measure of a species is not found in the size of their fleets or the power of their weapons. It is found in what they're willing to sacrifice for those they love, what they are willing to endure for those who cannot protect themselves. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces that had come to honor a woman they would never meet, but whose sacrifice had saved countless lives. The Zephyrian Empire sent 300 warships to conquer our colony, and they met one human pilot who refused to step aside. They learned that day what we have always known, that humanity will never surrender, never yield, and never stop fighting for the things we hold dear. Sarah Chun died as she lived, as a guardian of human freedom and a defender of the innocent. The memorial concluded with the traditional flyover, a formation of fighters from Sarah's old squadron painting contrails across Earth's blue sky. But one position in the formation remained empty, a gap in the precise geometry that honored the pilot who would never return to base. In the months that followed, recruitment for the Terran Defense Force increased by 300%. Young men and women from across human space volunteered for military service, inspired by the story of one pilot's courage against impossible odds. Training facilities were expanded, new ships were commissioned, and human military doctrine was revised to emphasize the aggressive tactics that had proven so effective against alien opponents. The Zephyrian Empire never again attempted to invade human space. Their military leadership, having experienced firsthand the cost of underestimating human determination, focused their expansion efforts on species that were less likely to fight back with such devastating effectiveness. The few border skirmishes that did occur were resolved quickly and quietly, with both sides working to avoid escalation. Other alien empires took note and adjusted their policies accordingly. Humanity had earned its place in galactic civilization through blood and fire, proving that technological superiority meant nothing when faced with courage that refused to acknowledge defeat. Commander Sarah Chun had died believing that her sacrifice would buy time for a few thousand civilians to escape to safety. She never knew that her final battle would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy, that her refusal to surrender would inspire a generation of human warriors, or that her name would be remembered long after the stars themselves grew cold. But, in the end, perhaps that was fitting. Heroes fight not for glory or recognition, but because someone must stand between the darkness and the light. Sarah Chun stood her ground when retreat was the only rational option, fought when victory was impossible, and proved that sometimes the greatest strength comes from refusing to accept that some battles cannot be won. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species that produced such warriors, and humanity would never forget the price of freedom, paid in full by one pilot's courage in the darkness between the stars.